Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
It really is, and kind of hits close to home for a lot of us. We're going to be talking about suffering,
hmm
but through a lens of faith.
Right. And specifically, we're diving into this talk
Yes.
from a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And what makes this one, I think, extra impactful
Oh, for sure.
is that he has been so open about his own struggles.
Yeah, he's had some health challenges that he's talked about.
Yeah.
And he really brings that vulnerability into this discussion.
It's powerful when people are willing to kind of be open and vulnerable like that.
Oh, it makes it so much more real, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, he actually opens the talk by talking about his cancer diagnosis.
Wow. So right off the bat.
Right away, he's letting you know, I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been in those dark places.
And it makes you feel like, okay, he gets it.
He gets it.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking from some ivory tower.
Right.
He's been through it.
Yes.
And he goes on to talk about all these different types of suffering, you know.
Like what kind of things?
Well, everything from physical pain
Yeah.
to emotional turmoil,
Of course.
you know, even the suffering that's caused by other people's choices.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Because sometimes it's not even our own doing, right?
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's one of the big takeaways here is that suffering is universal.
Everybody experiences it.
It's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
But how we deal with it,
How we respond to it.
that's where the real challenge is.
That's what matters. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think is so interesting is how he tackles this idea that suffering equals divine displeasure.
It's like, if you're suffering, you must have done something wrong.
Right. Like God's punishing you.
Right. And he uses this story of the disciples encountering a blind man.
Oh, I remember that story.
And they immediately jump to that conclusion, right? Like, why is this man blind?
Must be sin.
Must be some sin. Right?
Yeah.
But Jesus kind of turns that whole idea on its head.
He says, not so fast.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how does he reframe suffering then? What's the bigger picture that he's trying to paint?
Well, he suggests that even suffering that seems senseless or unfair even.
The stuff that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, even that can actually be a tool for growth
Really?
and refinement.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, he uses this analogy of a furnace,
Okay.
right? And he's saying the intense heat, yeah, it's not comfortable,
No, it's painful.
but it's burning away impurities.
Okay.
And what you're left with is something stronger.
So we're kind of being purified through these trials.
Yeah, like we're being refined.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how does that actually happen? How does suffering actually refine us?
That's a great question. And he doesn't necessarily give us like a step-by-step process.
Okay.
But one thing he emphasizes is that God isn't some distant observer
Right.
of our pain. He knows what we're going through.
He sees it.
He sees it, yeah. And he uses those experiences to shape us. And he gives this really interesting example of the prophet Joseph Smith
Okay.
crying out from Liberty Jail,
Oh, yeah.
feeling abandoned by God.
Like, where are you in all of this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then he contrasts that with his own experience
Right.
of feeling only God's love
Okay.
in the midst of agonizing pain.
So Joseph Smith is crying out, feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
And the speaker is saying, even in my pain, I felt God's love.
Exactly.
Huh. That's a very interesting contrast. And it kind of makes me wonder, is feeling loved enough when you're suffering?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Does it provide those answers and that comfort that we're so often searching for? Or can it feel kind of frustrating?
I think that's a struggle a lot of people have.
Yeah, like if you love me, why am I going through this?
Exactly.
Well-
If God loves us, why doesn't he just take the pain away?
Yeah. Why do we have to go through these hard things?
And that's where this idea of Christ's enabling power comes in.
Okay, let's talk about that.
It's a key concept
I've heard that phrase before.
in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So it's not just about toughing it out on our own?
No, it's about tapping into a source of strength that's greater than ourselves.
Oh, okay. But how does that work? What does that look like in practice?
Well, for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it goes back to the atonement of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
That because of his sacrifice, he understands our suffering perfectly.
He's been there.
He's been there, yeah.
Yeah.
And through his grace, we can receive strength beyond our own. And this power is especially accessible through covenants.
Through covenants.
Yeah.
Okay. So those sacred promises we make with God.
Right. And he uses this example of the people of Alma,
Oh, yeah.
who were forbidden from outward worship, but they found strength by clinging to their covenants.
Okay. So even when things were really tough, Those covenants kind of kept them going.
even if it meant praying silently in their hearts.
Hmm. It's fascinating to think about that. Finding strength in those quiet, almost hidden acts of faith. But for those who aren't part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what would you say? What can they take away from this idea of enabling power?
It's about recognizing that we don't have to go through hard times alone.
Yeah.
A lot of people find this power in different forms of prayer
Okay.
or meditation, connecting with nature,
Sure.
maybe acts of service to others.
So the core idea is the same.
The core idea is the same. There are sources of strength outside of ourselves that we can tap into.
Right. And those sources can help us face those really difficult things.
Yeah, those challenges that life throws our way.
So it's like, instead of viewing our hardships as proof that we're alone, we can actually look for those sources of strength that connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's something that can resonate with people,
Absolutely.
regardless of their background.
From all walks of life.
Yeah. So we've talked about reframing suffering. We've talked about finding that power beyond ourselves.
Yeah.
But there's this other idea that the speaker brings up that I find, I don't know, intriguing, but a little challenging.
Okay.
It's this idea of finding joy
Finding joy
amidst hardship.
in the middle of it all.
He actually talks about choosing joy each day,
Wow.
even when the suffering feels like it's never going to end.
That's a tough one.
It is.
I mean, how is that even possible?
Yeah, it's like, are you serious?
I know.
Yo.
It sounds almost impossible, especially when you're in the thick of it, right?
Right.
But I think it's important to remember, he's not talking about some superficial positivity
Okay.
or pretending that everything is okay.
Right.
It's not about slapping on a fake smile.
Okay.
It's about something much deeper,
Okay.
a kind of joy that comes from aligning our lives with eternal principles,
Okay. Aligning our lives with eternal principles.
with those things that have lasting meaning
Okay.
and value.
So not just the fleeting, superficial stuff.
Exactly. But the stuff that really matters.
The things that matter most.
He gives this example of this couple
Oh, yeah.
who couldn't have children,
Yeah.
but they found joy in serving the youth in their community.
Such a beautiful example.
And I love that example because it highlights that joy can be found in contributing to something
Yeah.
bigger than ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
in making a difference in other people's lives.
That's not all about us.
It's not, right?
And I think that's a key part of finding joy in the midst of suffering.
Okay. But it's still a challenge.
It is.
It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually live it.
Right.
And I think that's what we need to explore further.
Absolutely.
Like, how do we actually do this?
How do we find joy in the midst of real pain and hardship?
When it feels like everything is falling apart.
It's a question we all grapple with.
We do.
Mm.
And I'm really hoping we can find some answers as we continue this deep dive.
Me too, because I think there's a lot to unpack here.
There is. And a lot of hope to be found,
Absolutely.
even in the darkest of times.
Even in the darkest of times. It's really sticking with me, this idea of finding joy in the midst of hardship.
Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it?
It is. And I think what stood out to me is how the speaker emphasized it's not about denying the reality of what you're going through.
No, absolutely not. It's not about pretending everything's okay.
Right.
Or putting on a fake smile.
Not at all. He was very clear about that.
It's not about toxic positivity. He's talking about something much deeper.
Deeper, yeah.
That kind of joy that comes from, aligning your life with eternal principles.
Right.
With things that have lasting meaning.
The stuff that really matters.
Exactly.
He gave that example of the couple who couldn't have children,
Yeah.
but they found so much joy in serving the youth in their community.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. And it resonated with me because it highlights that joy can be found in contributing to something bigger than ourselves. It's not all about us.
Right. It's about making a difference.
Right. And I think that's a key part of this whole idea.
It's like that suffering maybe is refining us in a way that helps us detach our happiness from fleeting circumstances
Oh, that's interesting.
and anchor it to something more enduring.
Okay, so it's not just about finding joy in the midst of suffering, but maybe letting suffering change how we think about joy.
Yeah, exactly. Like it helps us discover sources of joy that are deeper, more resilient.
They can weather the storms.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a powerful message For anyone going through tough times, it's a reminder that even in those dark moments, there's always that glimmer of hope
That flicker of light.
that can guide us through.
But it's not a passive hope, is it?
No, it's active. It requires action.
We have to choose.
We have to choose faith, tap into that enabling power we talked about, and really seek out those sources of joy that can carry us through.
It's empowering, isn't it?
It is. It's like we become active participants in our own healing,
Right.
our own growth.
Instead of just being victims of our circumstances.
Exactly. We have agency. We have choices
And we can respond to challenges in ways that can make us stronger.
that help us grow from the experience.
So we've talked about reframing suffering, God's awareness of our pain,
Yeah.
accessing that power, that enabling power through covenants and ordinances.
Yeah.
We've explored this idea of choosing joy,
Choosing joy.
not as denial, but as a conscious decision to focus on eternal principles.
Powerful stuff.
It is. It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But it all points to this question. If God uses suffering to refine us, what aspects of our character might he be working on through our current challenges?
Whoa. That is a powerful question.
It is, isn't it?
And it's a question I think we all need to ask ourselves. It's like turning the lens inward,
Yeah.
saying, okay, what is this experience teaching me? What am I supposed to learn from this?
What am I meant to become?
Yeah, exactly. It can be uncomfortable
Oh,
facing those questions,
forcing us to look within.
but it can be really illuminating too.
You know, it's like we're invited to be active participants in the refining process, not just passive recipients. It's about recognizing that suffering isn't just something that happens to us, but something that can work in us,
To shape us.
to shape us into something stronger, more resilient.
Exactly.
And it reminds us that even when we're in the midst of those trials, we're not alone.
Absolutely not. We have a loving Heavenly Father who is aware of our pain and a Savior who has walked that path of suffering before us
Offering us his grace and strength.
to help us through.
Absolutely. But there's this one more crucial element the speaker touched on that we need to talk about, and it's one I found really surprising, actually, in the context of suffering.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
Gratitude.
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 I know, it seems counterintuitive, right?
It does.
To talk about gratitude when we're talking about suffering.
But he makes this really compelling case for its power.
Okay, tell me more.
He shares this incredible story of a woman who lost her daughter in a tragic accident, and then her husband to cancer.
Oh, wow.
It's hard to imagine a more profound level of suffering.
It really is.
And yet, when she was asked how she endured it all, she talked about finding strength and gratitude.
Gratitude.
Gratitude. And what's so remarkable is that she didn't express gratitude for the suffering, but gratitude in the midst of suffering.
That's an important distinction.
It is, isn't it? It's not about being grateful for the pain or the loss, but about finding those glimmers of light, those moments of beauty or connection that can still exist even in those really dark times.
Like those little sparks of hope.
He gave the example of the mother with cancer,
Oh, yeah.
who, despite all the pain and physical changes, she still found joy in those simple things.
Like what kind of things?
Spending time with your family,
Yeah.
watching a beautiful sunset.
Those simple joys.
It's a powerful reminder that gratitude isn't about ignoring the hard stuff, but it's about choosing to focus on what we still have.
What we can be grateful for.
The blessings that remain, even when it feels like everything's been taken away.
And that shift in perspective, that choice to focus on gratitude, can be so powerful.
Well, there's even research that shows that practicing gratitude can change our brains.
Really?
Yeah, make us more resilient, more optimistic, better able to cope with challenges.
So it's not just a feel-good sentiment. There's actual science behind it.
There is.
But I think in the context of faith, gratitude takes on a whole other level of meaning, doesn't it?
It does. It becomes an acknowledgement of God's hand in our lives.
Yeah, recognizing his love and mercy, even when we don't understand his purposes.
It's like saying, I trust you, God, even when it hurts.
I believe you are with me. You love me. You'll see me through.
And that kind of trust, that unwavering faith, can be a source of immense strength.
It can. It can carry us through those really difficult times.
But we're talking about embracing a long-term view here, aren't we?
We are. It's about looking beyond the immediate circumstances.
And trusting in a bigger picture.
A plan that we might not fully understand right now.
That takes faith.
It does.
Yeah.
And it brings us to another really key concept the speaker highlights. The importance of an eternal perspective.
Eternal perspective. Okay.
It's so easy to get caught up in the here and now,
Right.
the immediacy of our suffering.
To feel like it's never going to end.
Yeah, exactly. But he encourages us to step back,
Okay.
to view our trials through the lens of eternity.
Through the lens of eternity.
Because, our time here is just a small moment
In the grand scheme of things.
in the grand scheme of things. And even the most intense suffering, it's temporary.
It's temporary. He used a really interesting analogy to illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah, what was it?
He compared it to childbirth.
Childbirth.
In the moment, there's excruciating pain,
Right.
but there's also this knowledge that it will eventually lead to joy.
To the joy of holding that newborn child.
So powerful.
It is.
It's this reminder that our trials, no matter how hard they may seem, they're not the end of the story.
They're part of a bigger journey.
A journey back to our Heavenly Father.
Exactly.
But how do we hold on to that eternal perspective when we're in the middle of something that feels unbearable?
It's not easy, that's for sure. But I think it starts with faith.
Okay.
Trusting that there's a plan, even when we can't see it.
A plan that's bigger than us.
Believing that our suffering has a purpose.
Right.
That it's not just random.
It's not meaningless.
And remembering that we're not alone.
We have each other.
We do. We have our friends, our family, our community.
People who care.
We need each other. We need to lean on each other, share our burdens, and offer comfort and encouragement.
He talks about that a lot, doesn't he?
He does. The importance of community and connection, especially during tough times.
Especially when we're struggling.
He emphasizes that reaching out to others, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, asking for help when we need it, it's not weak.
It's actually a sign of strength.
It is. And on the flip side, we have a responsibility to reach out to others who are suffering.
To be there for them.
To offer a listening ear, a helping hand, a shoulder to cry on.
We're all in this together.
We are. We're all part of the human family.
We all have a role to play.
And I think there's one more piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
One more element he talked about that ties everything together.
I'm listening.
This idea that suffering can be a source of spiritual refinement.
Spiritual refinement. We've talked about refinement before.
Yeah.
But can you elaborate on what it means in this context?
How can something that feels so negative actually help us grow spiritually?
Yeah.
It's a complex idea, but I think it comes down to this. Suffering has a way of stripping away the superficial, forcing us to confront what really matters.
It's like those moments when you're facing a serious illness or a profound loss, and suddenly all the things that used to seem so important, they just fade away.
They do, don't they?
The material possessions, the status symbols.
It's like none of that matters anymore.
It doesn't, does it?
And what's left are the things that truly matter. Relationships, faith, values, our purpose in life.
And in that sense, suffering can be a catalyst for growth.
It can.
It forces us to reevaluate what we're really focused on.
To let go of what's not serving us.
And to really hone in on what truly matters.
Exactly.
It's like suffering refines our values.
It does.
It helps us see what's truly important.
And to live accordingly.
It's a powerful idea, isn't it?
It is.
That something that feels so negative and destructive can actually lead to positive change.
To growth and transformation.
I'm struck by this idea of suffering as a refining process.
Yeah.
It's challenging, for sure.
It is.
But it also offers a new way to understand our experiences.
A new lens.
A new lens.
To find meaning in the midst of pain.
And it reminds us that even in the darkest times,
there's potential for growth.
For healing and transformation.
Absolutely.
It's amazing, right? How suffering, something we try to avoid, can actually help us grow.
I know. It's almost like a paradox.
It is. One of the most thought-provoking things from this whole talk, I think.
I agree. It changes your whole perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Like suffering isn't something to fear.
Right.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah. He used that analogy of the furnace, right?
Oh, yeah.
The heat is painful, but it purifies, it strengthens.
It refines. And I think when we apply that to our own lives, it suggests that the challenges we face, as hard as they are, they can help us become more like Christ.
But okay, so it's not about like seeking out suffering.
Right.
Or, glorifying it.
No.
But it's about recognizing its potential.
Yeah, to shape us.
To mold us into something stronger, more resilient, more compassionate.
Exactly. And he gives some great examples of how this might actually look.
Oh, like what?
Well, he talks about developing empathy for others who are going through hard times.
That makes sense. You've been there, so you get it.
Right. Learning to rely on God's grace more fully. And discovering this inner strength that we didn't even know we had.
Yeah, I love that. What really hit home for me was his point about how suffering can help us let go of worldly things.
Oh, yeah. Like it strips away all the superficial stuff.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you see what really
It's like
matters.
a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is. It's humbling, but it's also really freeing.
It
You
is.
can reprioritize, focus on those things that are truly important. Relationships, faith, your purpose in life.
Those eternal things.
Yeah, the things that actually matter.
And that shift in perspective, it can be really transformative.
Yeah.
It frees you from all the busyness, all the worries.
The stuff that doesn't really matter in the end.
Exactly. And it lets you connect with something deeper, something more meaningful.
So while we might not go looking for suffering, we can face it with a sense of purpose,
Yeah.
knowing that it can refine us, deepen our faith, and bring us closer to God.
It's a beautiful thought, isn't it?
It is. But it also makes me wonder, are there any downsides to thinking about suffering this way?
That's a good question. I mean, could focusing too much on the potential benefits of suffering, could that make us minimize the pain that people are actually going through?
Yeah, like their pain is real.
Exactly. And we don't want to dismiss that. So I think it's about finding a balance.
Okay, balance.
Recognizing that potential for growth,
Mm-hmm.
but also acknowledging the pain, the grief, the real struggles people face. We don't want to downplay that at all.
It's about holding both those truths at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Recognizing the pain while also seeing the possibility for growth.
And I think that's where compassion comes in.
Compact.
Being there for people who are hurting, listening to their stories, and offering support without judgment, just being present.
Yeah, just being
And
there.
remembering that everyone's journey is different.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to suffering.
Exactly.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been.
I know, it's really been insightful.
We've explored so much, reframing suffering, finding joy in those tough times, that enabling power, the eternal perspective.
That's a lot to process.
It is. We've really wrestled with some challenging questions, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah.
But I think we've done it in a way that's both honest and hopeful.
Yeah. We faced the hard stuff.
But we've also found those glimmers of hope.
Absolutely. We've talked about the importance of reframing, finding that power, cultivating joy and gratitude, and that eternal perspective.
So many valuable tools.
And probably most importantly, that reminder that we're not alone in our struggles.
We're not.
We have a loving God who sees our pain, a Savior who understands it, and each other. We can lean on each other.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, I would just encourage everyone listening to reflect on their own experiences with suffering. What have your trials taught you? How has faith helped you through? And what sources of strength and joy have you found?
Those are great questions. And I think they're questions worth pondering because it's often in the depths of suffering that we discover our greatest growth, our deepest compassion, and the unshakable foundation of our faith.
So true.
This has been such a rich and meaningful conversation. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, even in the midst of suffering, there is always hope.